I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood up, set my napkin on the table, and walked out of my own son's wedding rehearsal dinner. That was 8 months ago. My son hasn't called since, and honestly, I'm still deciding whether that breaks my heart or finally explains everything. Let me back up. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working for the same engineering firm outside of Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous work. Pipe systems, drainage infrastructure, municipal contracts. But it paid well enough that my wife and I raised 2 kids in a 4-bedroom house with a finished basement and a backyard big enough for a trampoline. We took vacations to the Outer Banks every summer. We put both kids through state school without loans. We had what I would call, without embarrassment, a good life. Her name was Rosalind. We met at a church picnic in 1988. She was 24. I was 25. She had this laugh that made you feel like you were being let in on something. We dated for a year and a half, got married in October of 1990, and for a long time, I thought I had gotten things exactly right. Looking back, I can see where the cracks started. I just didn't know how to read them at the time. Our son, Bradley, was born in 1993. Our daughter, Meredith, came 2 years later. Rosalind stayed home until both kids were in school, then went back to work part-time at a dental office. She was good with the kids, patient with them in a way I sometimes wasn't. I worked long hours. I traveled occasionally for site inspections. I told myself I was doing it for the family, and I believed that. I still believe it. But somewhere in the late 2000s, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in any way you could point to in a single moment. Rosalind started coming home from work later. She started going to a Thursday evening yoga class that I never once saw any yoga gear come out of the dryer for. She started laughing at her phone in a way that she'd done with me once, and it had been a while since she'd aimed that laugh in my direction. I told myself it was just a phase. Couples go through phases. I'd read that somewhere. Or maybe I just wanted to believe it. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't dig through her phone. I asked her once, directly in the kitchen on a Sunday morning in 2011. I said, "Rosalind, is there something I should know about?" She looked at me over her coffee cup and said, "What kind of question is that?" And I let it go. I let it go because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to hold yet. We went on like that for 3 more years. In 2014, she told me she wanted a divorce. She was calm about it. Organized, even. She had already spoken to an attorney. She had a list of things she wanted from the house. She explained it to me the way you explain a termination to an employee, professionally, with documentation, with an eye toward minimizing disruption. I found out about him 6 weeks later, a man she'd met through a colleague. He was 51, divorced, no kids. He drove a truck that cost more than my first house. I saw them together once in a parking lot outside a restaurant, completely by accident. He opened the car door for her. She touched his arm before she got in. I sat in my car for 45 minutes after they drove away. Then I went home and called my attorney. The divorce took 14 months. We split the house equity down the middle, which was fair. I kept my pension. She kept her retirement account. We divided the furniture without fighting, which felt like a small mercy and also like the saddest thing in the world. When you've been married long enough that you can divide a household without arguing, it means you've already been gone from each other for longer than you knew. I moved into a 2-bedroom condo in Westerville. I was 51 years old, and I was starting over. Bradley was 21 when we divorced. Meredith was 19. They handled it about as well as any kids handle it, which is to say, they handled it badly in ways that didn't fully show up until later. Meredith cried a lot at first, then pulled herself together. She's always been the more resilient one. Bradley went quiet. He'd always been close to his mother, and I think the divorce confirmed something for him that I didn't fully understand until much later, that his mother was the one worth being loyal to. I don't say that with bitterness. I'm telling you the facts. Over the next several years, I rebuilt. That sounds dramatic, but it was mostly just slow, ordinary work. I made new routines. I got better at cooking. I started going on walks in the morning that turned into runs, which surprised me because I hadn't been a runner since my 30s. I had dinners with old friends. I dated a little, not seriously. I was not unhappy exactly, but I was alone in a way that has a particular weight to it when you've been half of something for 30 years. I went to Bradley's college graduation. I went to Meredith's. I showed up to every birthday, every holiday, every event that was asked of me. I tried hard to be present without being intrusive. I tried to let them have their lives with their mother without feeling like they had to manage me. Bradley met his fiancée, Tanya, in 2019. She was pleasant enough when I met her, though she had a way of making pleasantness feel like a performance. She smiled at the right times and said the right things, but her eyes never quite warmed up. I told myself I was being too critical. I told myself that was just who she was. He proposed in early 2022. They set the wedding for the following spring. I was happy for him, genuinely. Whatever had happened between me and Rosalind had nothing to do with what I wanted for my son, and what I wanted for my son was simple. I wanted him to love someone and be loved back, that's all. I got the invitation to the rehearsal dinner in February of 2023. Black and white cardstock, very elegant. It was being held at a restaurant called Alcott's in downtown Columbus. Private dining room, dinner for 30 people, the night before the wedding. My name was on the invitation. That's how I knew I was supposed to be there. I drove myself. I got there a few minutes early, actually. I'm that kind of person. I found the private room in the back of the restaurant, and a host was standing at the door with a seating chart. She showed me to my seat. I was at the far end of the table, not the fort, past the foot, a side table that had been pushed up against the main one, a little crooked at the corner. The kind of spot you put a high chair or an unexpected last-minute guest. Around me were Tanya's college roommates, none of whom I'd met, and a man I didn't recognize sitting one seat over who appeared to be in the middle of telling a very long story about a golf trip to Scottsdale. I stood there for a moment looking at the seating chart in the host's hand. I could see my name on it, handwritten. I could see where I'd been placed. At the head of the table, the actual head, the prominent seat, the seat where the father of the groom traditionally sits at a rehearsal dinner, was a man I recognized. It was him, Rosalind's partner, the man from the parking lot 9 years ago. He'd put on a little weight since then, but I knew his face. He was laughing at something, leaning back in the chair with the ease of someone who'd been told this seat was his. I didn't say anything. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just long enough to be sure I was seeing what I was seeing. I set my jacket on the back of my assigned chair so it wouldn't look like I'd simply walked out. I wanted it to look like I'd stepped away to use the restroom. Then I walked calmly to the front of the restaurant, handed the host my coat check ticket, tipped her $20, and walked out to my car. I sat in the parking lot. My phone was already buzzing by the time I got the heat running. It was Bradley. I didn't answer. Then again. Then a text, "Dad, where are you?" Then Rosalind. Then Tanya. Then Bradley again. I counted 19 messages over the next 40 minutes before I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. I made a sandwich. I watched the news. I went to bed at 10:30. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds cold, but here's what I want you to understand. I had been practicing some version of that moment for years without knowing it. Every time I showed up and said nothing. Every birthday dinner where I sat across from my ex-wife and was polite. Every holiday where I absorbed whatever the situation required of me without making it about myself. I had been building up to that sandwich, that news program, that 10:30 bedtime for a very long time. In the morning, I called Bradley. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting. "Dad." His voice was tight. "Good morning," I said. "You left. You just left." "I did." "Tanya's upset. Her whole family saw. Mom is." "Bradley," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I'd like you to be honest with me." He was quiet. "Did you know where I'd be seated last night?" A pause. A very particular kind of pause, the kind that tells you the answer before the words do. "The seating was Tanya's thing," he said. "But you knew." I thought you'd handle it." I heard what he was actually saying. He had known. He had decided I would absorb it, because that's what I did. That's what I had always done. I absorbed things. I showed up and handled it, and didn't make it about myself, and somewhere along the way that had stopped being considered a virtue, and had started being treated like a guarantee. I need you to hear me say this clearly, I said. I love you. I want your marriage to be happy. But I'm not going to sit at the foot of a side table while the man your mother left me for sits at the head of it. Not at my son's rehearsal dinner. Not anywhere. He didn't say anything. I'll be at the wedding tomorrow, I said. I'll be dressed appropriately. I'll be polite to everyone. But if there's a seating arrangement that puts me somewhere like that again, I'll leave again. Not to make a scene. Just because I've decided that some things aren't worth sitting through anymore. The wedding was the next afternoon. I wore my navy suit. I sat in the 4th row on the groom's side, which was where they put me on a ceremony card. Rosalind was in the 2nd row with her partner. He was in a gray suit. He looked comfortable there, in that row, in that seat, like he'd been there for years. Maybe in some ways he had. I watched my son get married. He looked happy. Tanya looked happy. I'm telling you truthfully, I was glad for him. Not glad in a complicated way, not glad despite myself. Just glad, the way you are when someone you love gets something good even if the road to it included something hard. I clapped when the officiant announced him. I shook hands at the reception. I said the right things to the right people. But I did not give a toast. I had written one. 3 weeks before the wedding, I'd sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and worked on it for 2 hours. I talked about the first time Bradley threw a baseball back to me and actually hit my glove. I talked about the summer we drove to Yellowstone when he was 12, and he fell asleep on my shoulder in the car coming home. Too old for that, really. But I didn't move. I talked about what I hoped for him. I left the legal pad on my kitchen counter that morning. It's still there. I haven't been able to throw it away. At the reception, I sat at my assigned table. A table near the back, respectable enough, nothing egregious. I ate the chicken and the asparagus and talked to my second cousin and her husband, who drove up from Cincinnati and who are exactly the kind of people who make a difficult night more bearable because they ask about your work and actually listen to the answers. Rosalind came to my table once, briefly, midway through the reception. She stood there for a moment like she was deciding whether to say something specific or just confirm that she'd stopped by. "He was happy you came," she said. "I know," I said. She left. That was the whole conversation. I left before the cake cutting. I drove home in the dark on I-270, windows down even though it was cold, because the air felt necessary. I got home and hung my suit up carefully and sat in my kitchen for a while with the legal pad on the table in front of me, not reading it, just having it there. I had a voicemail from Meredith that night. She'd been at the wedding too, down in the 3rd row. We'd waved at each other. She'd squeezed my arm once during the cocktail hour and said, "You okay?" And I'd said, "Fine," in the way that actually means I'm holding it together. "Thank you for asking." Her voicemail said, "Dad, I just want you to know that I saw what they did at the rehearsal dinner, and I think it was wrong. I didn't know about it beforehand. I wanted you to hear that from me." I played it twice, then I poured a glass of water and stood at my kitchen window for a while looking at the parking lot. She'd called because she wanted me to know. She hadn't called her brother first. She'd called me. That's the part I keep coming back to. It's been 8 months. Bradley and I have spoken 4 times. Short calls, polite, careful, like two people who don't entirely trust the ground between them. I don't know if that will improve. I hope it does. I'm not holding on to what happened as a way of punishing him. I understand that he's a young man who loves his wife and is navigating a situation that has never been simple. But I also understand something that I don't think I understood clearly before all of this. Being patient is not the same as being without limits. I had confused those two things for a very long time. I thought that absorbing things quietly was the same as being strong. I thought the cost of keeping the peace was something you just paid, indefinitely, without ever sending a bill. I'm 63 years old. I have, maybe, if I take care of myself and things go well, 30 more years. I don't know how to spend them yet. But I know I'm done spending them trying to make other people comfortable by making myself small. I run 3 mornings a week now. I'm reading more than I have since college. Last month I drove down to Asheville by myself, stayed at a bed and breakfast, walked around, ate at a restaurant alone, and found that I didn't mind it. On the last day I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched a thunderstorm come across the mountains, just watching it come. And I thought, This is mine. This morning, this coffee, this storm rolling in. This is mine, and no one can seat someone else in this chair. That's not a bitter thought. I want to be clear about that. It's actually the first thing that's felt like peace in a long time. There's a version of that night where I stay, where I sit down at that crooked side table, make small talk with people I don't know, eat the bread, and smile through the whole thing. I've played it out in my head. I know exactly how it goes. I absorb it. I go home. I tell myself it was the right thing to do because it kept the peace, and Bradley never has to feel uncomfortable, and Rosalind never has to answer for anything. And I carry it quietly, the way I've carried everything else. That version used to feel like strength to me. It doesn't anymore. What I've come to understand, slowly, not all at once, is that there's a difference between patience and erasure. For most of my adult life, I confused the two. I thought enduring things without complaint was a form of character, and maybe it is, up to a point, but past that point, it stops being character and starts being permission. When you absorb enough without ever drawing a line, you teach the people around you that there is no line, that you can be seated anywhere, that your presence doesn't require consideration. Bradley knew where I'd be placed at night. He told me himself. In that pause before he said it was Tanya's thing, he knew, and he let it happen because he trusted, correctly, based on 30 years of evidence, that I would handle it. That's not a failure of love. I believe he loves me, but love without integrity has a ceiling. You can love someone and still treat them carelessly if you've learned they'll let you. What I did when I walked out wasn't dramatic. I want to be clear about that. I didn't flip a table. I didn't make a speech. I tipped the host and went to my car. The drama, if there was any, lived entirely in other people's expectations. They expected me to sit down. I didn't. That was all. But that decision required something I'd spent years quietly building without knowing I was building it. The clarity to see a situation plainly, the honesty to name what it was, and then the willingness to act on that honesty even when it cost me something. It cost me 19 missed calls and 8 months of careful, surface-level conversations with my son. That's a real cost. I'm not pretending it isn't. The thing about consequences, though, is that they run in both directions. The night I absorbed quietly had consequences too. They just accumulated over decades instead of overnight. Every time I swallowed something and said nothing, I made a deposit into an account I didn't know I was keeping. The rehearsal dinner was just the night I finally looked at the balance. Meredith called me. That matters to me more than I can easily explain. She didn't call her brother first. She didn't call her mother. She called me, and she said it was wrong, and she wanted me to hear that from her. That's what a person with a real moral compass does. They say the uncomfortable true thing to the right person, even when it's inconvenient. She didn't have to do that. She did it anyway. I've thought about that voicemail probably 50 times since. I'm 63. I'm not starting over exactly. I'm just starting to be honest about what I'm willing to carry and what I'm not. That's not bitterness. It's not even wisdom, really. It's just something you arrive at, eventually, if you're paying attention and you're willing to look at what the evidence actually says. That morning in Asheville, watching the storm come across the mountains, I wasn't thinking about any of this. I was just drinking my coffee. But I noticed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to be there. I'd just gone. I just sat down, in my own chair, at my own pace, with no one else's seating arrangement to navigate. That's a small thing. But small things, it turns out, are where most of life actually lives.